On today's episode, we have our Week 7 rankings. You heard it right. We are now dipping our toes into ranking positions. We're going to start with running backs and wide receivers to test this out. Normally on this feed, at this time of the week, we're doing our previews. We're not axing the previews. The previews will come back at some point, but we're just trying something new, trying out a different format. We're trying to find what is the most valuable content to you, the mean team. We've got to sort through 6 teams on a bye this week, and we have to deal with a ton of injuries. It's going to be a ton of fun. Our format here is simple. I have ranked the top 42 wide receivers this week, and I've broken them into tiers. As I go through each wide receiver, Keegan and Aidan are going to give their thoughts on some of the guys they are starting or avoiding this week. It may get a little contentious looking at you, Aidan, but it's going to be fun. I'm ready to debate. Feel free, if you are watching this video, feel free to drop your start-sit questions in the comments, and you could also find the link to our rankings in the description of this video. But before we dive into rankings, we want to thank you for supporting the Regression to the Mean podcast. Seriously, we appreciate you listening and being a part of the Mean team. If you haven't had the chance, we'd appreciate it if you could go ahead and hit the subscribe button, like this video, and drop any of your questions in the comments below. We are marching towards our goal of 1,000 subscribers before the end of the season, and we really appreciate you tagging along. Aidan, Keegan, we ready to do this?
Let's rock and roll, baby. Version 1. Here goes nothing.
Version 1. It's going to be the best thing we've ever put out there. Okay.
Ever.
Starting out things real hot. The first tier, the can't miss. Start your studs. I have Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, AJ Brown, and Davante Adams. Tyreek Hill's pretty simple. This is the best wide receiver in football. It's a shootout game environment. This is actually a pretty solid matchup against a shockingly bad Eagles secondary. Cooper Kupp has the 3rd highest target share in the NFL since returning from his injury, plus matchup against Pittsburgh. Look at the notes you have for Tyreek Hill. Incredible game environment, high point total, lots of points. I'm expecting A.J. Brown to dunk on this Miami secondary, and this pass offense now runs through AJB. He has the 5th highest percent of first read targets. My first real bump up in the rankings, and it's controversial when you're looking at it, I guess, compared to expert consensus rankings with Fantasy Pros. I've got Davante Adams ahead of Stefon Diggs, Keenan Allen, and Amon Ra St. Brown because there are squeaky wheels, Keegan and Aidan, and then there is what Davante Adams is doing, which is absolute scorched earth, going to the media, dropping crazy quotes saying, I don't care if we're winning or losing, greatness will only come if you're throwing me the rock. I think that regardless of who's playing quarterback for the Raiders this week, we're going to see a massive Davante Adams game, right? You just have to see 10 to 13, 14 targets incoming. And look, Aidan, I think the Bears secondary has played decent. You guys have mitigated fantasy points to wide receivers because the Bears have kind of hemorrhaged points to running backs, but it kind of feels like a major Davante Adams spike week. So I'll pause here. Do you guys agree with me having Adams so high because of this narrative? What do you guys think?
I'll let Aidan go first.
No, I personally disagree. I'm ahead of guys like Diggs, Keenan, Aiyuk, AR. Like, I'm probably having him closer to 10. I actually didn't have this as a shout on mine. I don't see it. We don't even know who's playing quarterback. Bears secondary and defense as a whole has played a lot better over the last 2 weeks. It is not a great unit by any means, but they were pretty damn strong, especially in the second half last week. Played pretty good the week before that too. And again, we don't even know who's throwing Davante Adams the football. It could be rookie AOC or journeyman Brian Hoyer. So to guarantee him as a top 4 play feels a bit ambitious on our part. I'd probably feel more comfortable with him closer to 10, but at the same time, you know, he's causing a ruckus. AJ Brown did it, went off. Jamar Chase did it, went off. Is Davante Adams going to do it too? They're all in the same tier in terms of talent. So maybe, I don't know. I put him down a little, but I don't hate him here at the same time too.
Yeah, I think he's a top 7 play. Where he is between 7 and 4 could be up for debate, but I think this is Davante Adams we're talking about, and I don't know if I really care who is actually playing quarterback for them. You make fuss like that in the media, and you're Davante Adams, the ball's going to come your way for sure. Obviously, concerns with Jakobi Meyers and what a good target he has been for them, but nonetheless, this is Davante Adams we're talking about. And if I'm following the trend of wide receivers speaking out and then having blow up games, I'm down to chase this one.
We're chasing this narrative, the squeaky wheel, that this is like the nuclear squeaky wheel in terms of how insane his comments in the press were. So that's why I moved him up there. The next tier I have is Stefon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Amon Ra St. Brown, and Brandon Aiyuk. Steph Diggs is fantasy's wide receiver 2 this year, has an absolutely bonkers role, career best efficiency. He's got a really, I'd say, decent matchup against the New England Patriots secondary that's banged up, but I think this is going to be like a relatively neutral pace or slow game. I have Keenan Allen here as wide receiver 6. He's fantasy's wide receiver 1 in a point per game basis. This could be a shootout against the Chiefs. Keenan Allen has a history of beating up on the Chiefs. Chiefs defense has been pretty stingy, though, so it's something to keep an eye on. Amon Ra St. Brown at wide receiver 7, so Baltimore's been incredibly stingy to wide receivers this season. I think this matchup is going to be one of the slower paced, grinded out, establish the run games with big plays. He's still locked into one of the best wide receiver roles in football, and with Monty out and Gibbs and Reynolds potentially limited, I think I could see like a 10-plus target Amon Ra St. Brown game. And then Brandon Aiyuk has one of the best roles in all of fantasy. He has a matchup here against a Vikings secondary that has given up the most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. Upgrade, if either Deebo or CMC are out, like he could go up into like the top 5 if either of those guys. Maybe not CMC, but if Deebo misses time, all right, I think Brandon Aiyuk's gonna have a massive, massive game. So I'll pause here. What are your guys' thoughts on that tier? Any guys?
I'm all good on this tier.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight Aiyuk. I absolutely love him this week. Again, I would probably move up Diggs, Keenan, and Aiyuk ahead of Davante this week, given their matchups. Just a couple things quickly on Aiyuk. You already mentioned it. Anything to Deebo and CMC, even if they play, these guys aren't going to be 100%. This guy's already averaging 7 targets a game. Like, he's been an absolute target hog. Not to mention, he hasn't scored since his 2-touchdown performance in week 1. So it is safe to say he is going to regress to the mean this week. Let's get Aiyuk in the end zone. I think Aiyuk's going to go absolutely nuclear this week. I think the 49ers come back from kind of getting, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but it was a bit of a wake-up call playing the Browns. I don't think anyone anticipated that game was going to be that close to a game led by P.J. Walker. So I could see Brock Purdy absolutely shredding that secondary, and I think Aiyuk is going to be leading the charge. So I'm super high on Aiyuk this week.
I'm pretty excited to watch him on Monday night against this Vikings secondary. I agree. So the next batch of wide receivers I hear at wide receiver 9, I have Jaylen Waddle. Wide receiver 10, DK Metcalf. Wide receiver 11, Puka Nacua. Wide receiver 12, Chris Olave. Wide receiver 13, Devonta Smith. Wide receiver 14, Marquise Brown. And wide receiver 15, Tyler Lockett. So Jaylen Waddle has had really strong usage since returning from injury. He faces off against the 5th friendliest fantasy defense to wide receivers and the highest point total matchup this week against Philadelphia. DK Metcalf's been super disappointing, but this is the definition of a get-right game against the Cardinals secondary that's given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Puka Nacua, I have him here at wide receiver 11. He has the 12th highest target share in the NFL since Kupp's return from IR. So again, Kupp has the 3rd, Puka has the 12th. We love that kind of consolidation. He faces off against the 4th friendliest defense to wide receivers in Pittsburgh, and he's playing in a plus matchup, and he's playing under a dome. Dome Bros, shout out. Chris Olave here at 12. Devonta Smith at 13. So he's been ultra disappointing this season, but he still has the 2nd best role in this Eagles pass game. We've already highlighted this matchup against the Dolphins being kind of the crown jewel of a stinky week 7 slate. And I think he's going to have a nice bounce back game, or at least be pretty solid with usage. I know it's been disappointing. I know he popped up with a hammy injury. You got to start Devonta Smith. Keep the faith. He still has a good role. This is a great matchup. It's a great spot. I don't really believe in this Miami secondary. At 14 here is Marquise Brown. So would you have guessed going into this year, guys, that he would have a top 12 fantasy role in terms of usage through the first 6 weeks? Like, you look at his air yard share, end zone targets, receiving yard share, target per route run, yard per route run. It's all really solid for Marquise Brown. And he'd score more fantasy points if his quarterback was more consistent. I think Josh Dobbs has been fine given the circumstances. It just hasn't been very consistent. This matchup projects to be up in pace. Seattle's given up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this year. I feel pretty good about Marquise Brown. And then the last guy in this matchup, same matchup here, is Tyler Lockett. So he has a higher target share than DK Metcalf this year. He looks a step slower, but he still looks fine. He's still a good player. This is a plus matchup, and the game script, I think, makes him an easy wide receiver too. So I'll pause there. Anyone here in this range standing out to you?
Yeah, there's actually there's one specifically. I also just had some notes, not necessarily as starts because I think obviously you start these guys, but I think this is DK Metcalf and like Jaylen Waddle blow up week territory for both of them. Shaun already highlighted a little bit of it, but just like really good matchups for both of them. And DK has been not very disappointing, but their offensive line gets healthier every week. Gino looked like he had a little bit more time last week. Obviously, Cincinnati's defensive front has some really good ways to kind of get to the quarterback. But nonetheless, they're getting healthier. More time in the pocket for Geno Smith is good for DK. I think this is such a great matchup for him to get right. Same with Jaylen Waddle. Like, Philadelphia is super friendly to fantasy wide receivers. I think this is a big blow up. But my guy in this tier that I wanted to specifically highlight as like a surefire start for me this weekend is Marquise Brown. Hollywood is, probably the biggest regression candidate coming into week 7 alone. I mean, weeks 5 to 6, his expected fantasy points per game currently sits at about like 19.2 PPR points. He's only put up like 11.8 per game in that stretch. And last week, he had an expected fantasy point total of 21.4 and only managed to turn it into 7.5 PPR points. Only him and Jamar Chase have ranked top 25 in expected fantasy points in each of the last 5 weeks. Just to hammer home that usage that Shaun was talking about, like he has an elite fantasy football role, and he walks into a Seattle matchup that's been pretty bad against wide receivers, and not just wide receivers specifically, but they're 4th worst against outside wide receivers specifically, which is exactly where Hollywood will be playing. Also double-digit targets in 4 of his last 5 games. The only thing that would make this matchup a little bit worse for him is the health of Witherspoon and Tyreek Woolen. I believe they're both going to play this week, so we'll see how that matchup fares. But I love Marquise Brown this week.
Seattle's a little fraudulent in terms of their secondary, which has been good, but they've given up a ton of fantasy points to wide receivers. So I feel you. Those are both 2 good corners, and it's something to keep an eye on, but people unable to get home regardless. I love the shout out to Marquise Brown. I was not surprised considering you are president. You're co-president. I don't know. You're very busy with your Mike Evans duties, but I feel like when Mike Evans retires,
he's on the board.
Your transition to Hollywood Brown will be a seamless pivot, Keegan. I think it'll be a very easy transition for you. They're keeping your seat.
His role is elite.
It's a very good role. And
his role is elite.
Kyler's coming back.
Massive buy low candidate. Yes.
And Kyler's
I would be
coming
buying
back.
Marquise Brown right now.
I'm going to eat crow on the Kyler Murray take. Aidan, anyone here in this tier? I think I have an idea who you're going to talk about. You've been talking about this theory.
I have one here that I think people need to be. I think people are a bit too high on it this week, given kind of like the matchup, like on the surface level, and that's Puka. Just like a couple things off the top of my head. I think the first week of Kupp and Puka kind of spoiled people into thinking like these are both just going to be 20-point outputters, both at the same time every single week, and I just don't think that's the case. Cooper Kupp is a significantly better wide receiver, and we already saw that last week with his usage. Season low of catches, yards, and targets. The Steelers, like you mentioned, are 4th worst in terms of fantasy points per game to wide receivers, but I think this number is a bit deceiving, so I want to walk you guys through real quickly their 5 matchups this week. It's more so been the number 1 absolutely exploding and the number 2 playing a very, very complimentary role. Week 4, Nico Collins exploded 7 for 168 and 2 tutties. Next closest was 42 yards. In week 3, this is probably the best in terms of 1A and 1B. Tay went for 13, 172 and 2. Jakobi had 85 yards. Week 2, Amari had 7 catches for 90 yards. The next person had 48 yards. And week 1, which I'm sure you remember, Aiyuk had 8 catches for 129 yards and 2 tutties. Deebo had 55 yards. So in my opinion, I think the numbers are a bit deceiving on the surface level. This is really like the stud going off, which Cooper Kupp is. He's the guy in the slot. He's not going to have Joey Porter on him in the slot. I think Cooper Kupp goes absolutely nuts this week, which makes me think it's hard for Puka to hit home as a top 11 play personally. He's obviously still a must start given his target share and his role in that offense, but I think the expectations are maybe a bit high for him this week given kind of the matchup on the surface level.
You brought some really good data. I'm not going to refute that. I mean, I think maybe Yeah, we'll see. I'm excited to see how this plays out. That's a pretty good argument. I see a 12%. I mean, I see the 12th highest target share.
His role's
pass
elite.
happy.
Like
I think they're
the
not going
role's
to be
elite.
able to run the ball. I think it's going to be a super pass happy game script in a dome. So, but yeah, I definitely like that theory. I definitely do.
It's just so concentrated for the Rams. I actually have in my notes that like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are must starts this week. Absolute smash plays. Like they have such a concentrated passing attack. Over the last 2 weeks, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua have combined for 73% of the first read target share.
It's amazing.
Over the last 2 weeks.
So good. It's so good. It's everything we asked for.
ridiculous.
Such a good role. You kind of just like I
It's
know Aidan
perfect
like
for fantasy.
said
It's
you
perfect
have
for
to
fantasy.
play him, but I understand where he's coming from. But it's how do
This
you
is a
not
ranking
start
show.
him?
This is a ranking show where Aiden's saying, "Hey, you got him at 11. I'd have him more at 16." That's the beauty of the ranking show, right? So, I love it. I
I
think
bumped down. Yeah, I bumped down a bit.
your theory, I was ready to like really refute it, but I'm interesting to see if that has more to do with the receiving cores that they've faced off against. Whatever. I remember Nico Collins was my start of the week against Pittsburgh. He dominated because they can't defend the middle of the field, and then
Smashed.
I'm now remembering that where does Cooper Kupp dominate? Okay, so here we're moving on to the next batch of wide receivers. So at wide receiver 16, I have Mike Evans. Wide receiver 17, I have Deebo Samuel. I'm projecting Deebo to play this week. We shall see. Wide receiver 18, Christian Kirk. Wide receiver 19, Calvin Ridley. Wide receiver 20, Christian Watson. Wide receiver 21, Amari Cooper. And wide receiver 22, in Zay Flowers. And remember, listeners, full point PPR. This is what I'm referencing here for these rankings. Should have dropped that earlier in the episode, but full point PPR. So Mike Evans, wide receiver 16, facing off against the Atlanta Falcons. I've got him 2 spots lower than expected expert rankings. Really here, he has elite usage, but he's playing in a really projected low scoring and slow paced slog versus an Atlanta secondary that's really neutralized pass catchers so far this year. I have limited concerns about the hamstring. You're not benching him, but this is a tough matchup. He's probably going to get shadow coverage from AJ Terrell. Deebo, I think he's going to play. He's day-to-day with a shoulder stinger. If he suits up, he's going to be locked and loaded as a wide receiver 2. I think it has a higher likelihood he plays over CMC. If CMC sits, I think Deebo could get some backfield touches. Wide receiver 18, wide receiver 19, Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley. We're recording this Thursday night. Christian Kirk outscored Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley had a goose egg. But again, I think that moving forward, these two should be ranked right next to each other, or Kirk ranked above Ridley. The reason why is Ridley, he gets a lot of downfield market share and air yard share, which is really enticing for spike weeks. But Calvin Ridley gets more layup targets out of the slot over the middle, and it's more consistent week in and week out. I'll pause there. Aidan, I know you wanted to talk about Christian Kirk versus Calvin Ridley. You want to explain your thoughts real quick?
Yep. Yeah, I know. I think we were all kind of on the same page that the gap coming into the season was far too big between Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. I had in my notes that I wrote down earlier today, Christian Kirk should be ranked higher than Calvin Ridley moving forward until proven otherwise. Coming into this game, the gap has only gotten wider. He had more targets, yards, receptions, and equal amount of touchdowns. Again, really didn't really do anything today. I don't know if it was just the design script, but Christian Kirk was wide receiver, I want to say off the top of my head, like 12 last year.
He was on a
I think,
point per game basis. He was like a mid-tier wide receiver too, but he played all year, so he ended up being like a top 12.
So, in my opinion, like the chemistry and the game plan is just like, Christian Kirk continues to deliver, whether it's, it's kind of like your steady 14, 15, 16, like right there. Tonight he gave 19 in PPR formats. In my opinion, they should be close, but yeah, until proven otherwise, Christian Kirk continues to outperform him if you take out week 1. Yeah. So, yeah, I would put Christian Kirk ahead of him personally moving forward.
Christian Watson is one of my more aggressive ranks I have this week. No shocker. I have him 7 spots ahead of expected consensus rankings. Elite usage coming out of a bye, healthy against the worst defense in football. Sign me up. Amari Cooper is a positive regression candidate here as a wide receiver 21. I move him up if Watson plays. This game has an up and pace matchup game script against a middling Colts secondary. Wide receiver 22, I've got Zay Flowers here. Elite usage for a rookie, like truly elite stuff. Zay's going to explode in the second half of the season. I honestly think at this point he's the 1A to Andrews' 1B, and I didn't expect that at this point. Lions have given up the 12th most points to wide receivers this season, but a slow pace matchup. So I don't know how much volume is going to be there for Zay, but I think it's a good matchup regardless. Wide receivers 23, 24, and 25. I've got Drake London, Terry McLaurin, and DJ Moore. Drake London has a matchup here against Tampa Bay in one of the lowest point outings in the morning slate here. I still like him this week. I have him 3 spots ahead of expert consensus rankings. He looks really good, developing a rapport with Ritter. I think the pass volume will continue to go up because Atlanta will struggle to run the ball against Tampa Bay. And then McLaurin up against a pretty beatable Giants secondary. McLaurin had his best week of the year last year in terms of target share. I think he's kind of grown that rapport with Sam Howell. And then 25 is DJ Moore. -7 in expert consensus rankings. I didn't feel great about this. I have major concerns about Tyler Badgett, a.k.a. T-Bag, who's going to be the starting quarterback.
Say his nickname.
For T-Bag, a.k.a. the quarterback for the Chicago Bears this weekend. And this game's got a terrible game script. It's slower than molasses. You got T-Bag dropping back, getting sacked, T-Bags and sacks. But Moore's role is so elite. DJ Moore's role is so elite. Like, it's really hard to knock him out of wide receiver 2 range. So I can't drop him any farther, in my opinion. But I'll pause there. Anything here standing out to you guys before we go to the next round of receivers?
There's 2 guys in this range, actually, that you mentioned kind of up on the higher end. But Amari Cooper and Zay Flowers. I don't have a ton of notes on Zay. I just want to mention, like, his usage remains really strong. I mean, 21% of his targets from Lamar Jackson in 5 of the last 6 games this season. Like, very clear sidekick to Mark Andrews, and like has an opportunity to start becoming a really big difference maker in this offense. Just got to come down with a couple extra balls here and there. Lions also a bit banged up right now. I think their nickel cornerback, Brian Branch, might miss the game, which would be pretty huge for Zay Flowers and just his opportunity. And then Amari Cooper. I think the ranking is pretty fair, but I think he's one of these outside looking in wide receivers that could potentially finish really high this week. And I don't necessarily know how much of a difference it really makes between PJ Walker and Deshaun Watson. Yes, Deshaun Watson, we would like to give a boost to Amari Cooper if he plays. But, I mean, last week he had 32% of the first read targets and 48% of the air yards from PJ Walker. Like, alpha wide receiver can help. I don't want to call PJ Walker a bad quarterback.
He wasn't very good last. I watched the whole game. He was fine. He's going to continue. He's going to continue to be a good backup quarterback in the NFL, but he's a backup quarterback.
Yeah, but I just want to throw out, like, a guy like Amari Cooper is exactly who, if PJ Walker plays, we'll go to every time, and if Deshaun Watson is in, that just boosts his potential even more. Colts are also allowing a league high 11.5 receptions and 142.8 yards a game to opposing outside wide receivers. So a great matchup for Amari Cooper. And if PJ Walker's there, it's like first read target share is going to skyrocket. And if Deshaun Watson plays, like, you have better opportunities for deep balls. So I think Amari is kind of a wide receiver 2 based on rankings that might be able to finish as a wide receiver 1 this week. I really like him.
He made some incredible plays against the Browns last week. Like, truly, I mean, against the Niners, sorry. He looked really, just like really good. Their offense is still really weird. So it's really hard to like get super aggressive with pushing him up, considering quarterback pace, etc. But I would be not shocked if he had a monster week this week. Moving on to the next batch of wide receivers here. At wide receiver 26, I've got Jakobi Meyers. Wide receiver 27, I've got Michael Pittman. Wide receiver 28, Jordan Addison. Wide receiver 29, Chris Godwin. Wide receiver 30, Josh Palmer. Wide receiver 31, George Pickens, and wide receiver 32, Diontae Johnson. I don't think Aidan knows how much I despise and loathe Josh Palmer.
I'm starting to come around on it. You've been dropping breadcrumbs along the way for the last couple months.
Do something, Josh Palmer. Okay, so Jakobi Meyers, wide receiver 26 at the Chicago Bears. I have him down 4 spots against expert consensus rankings. He's had unbelievable usage this past 2 weeks. But again, I'm projecting Davante Adams to blow up. That means we're going to see less volume for Myers. That's the reason I have this rank. Michael Pittman has a matchup against the secondary that's allowed the fewest points per game to wide receivers. I mean, the Cleveland Browns defense is going to eat against Gardner Minshew. Love Michael Pittman in his usage. Hard to get him out of like fringe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 territory. I got Jordan Addison here at wide receiver 28. So he's a locked in every down player with Jefferson out. He trailed TJ Hawkinson in target share, but he had close to 40% of the air yard share in week 6 with a 14-yard ADOT. because of that ADOT and because of the air yard share and because of his role in snaps, he just has higher upside with big play potential versus Osborne. And the Niners have been sneaky mid against receivers. They're not like the Seahawks secondary or the Vikings secondary, but you could get home against the Niners defense with wide receivers. Chris Godwin's probably my biggest dropper in terms of any rank. I've got him down 10 spots versus expert consensus rankings. Tampa Bay's wide receiver 2 in terms of usage in a projected low-scoring and slow-paced matchup versus a stingy Atlanta defense to wide receivers. I'm good. Like, I'm already kind of reticent about Mike Evans, so I'm going to be a little reticent about Chris Godwin. Josh Palmer, I have him actually up 3 spots, even though I'm not a biggest fan of his game. He's the clear wide receiver 2 in this offense with Mike Will out. I expect him to see a pretty decent amount of volume with okay at best efficiency. It's a tougher matchup against the Chiefs, but the game environment should be fine. And then I didn't really know what to do with George Pickens and Diontae Johnson, so I just put them right next to each other in wide receiver 3 land, down 2 spots each. Pickens has had elite usage, then expanded route tree with Diontae out, but what does it look like with Johnson back from IR? The Rams have been pretty stingy to wide receivers, but, this game projects to be up in pace, played indoors. And then Diontae, clear target earner. He runs better routes than Pickens when healthy. I have no idea if he'll be limited or not coming off the hamstring. No idea what the route distribution is. Because of that, you can't really rank him any higher than, like, this spot, in my opinion. So I'll stop here before we get to our last batch of receivers. Anything in this range, speaking your language.
The theme of a lot of these things are outside wide receivers, and you just brought up another outside wide receiver with a questionable role this week. George Pickens is a player I think I'm avoiding this week.
Same.
When Diontae Johnson and George Pickens play together, Pickens is averaging about 8.1 half PPR points per game. And in the 18 games where Diontae Johnson has been active and they're together, Pickens is averaging like 5.1 targets per game. Like, it's very clear that Kenny Pickett has a preference when who is on the field. And also Diontae Johnson's game is just much different than George Pickens. And as long as Matt Canada is calling plays for this offense, I don't expect like George Pickens to suddenly not just run go routes on the outside, on the barrier. And until that happens, it's really hard to say that with him and Johnson playing together, you could project that Pickens would be the better wide receiver choice. Also, the Rams defense that we thought was going to be a cakewalk for most of the year is only behind Cleveland in points per game allowed to outside wide receivers this year.
I don't know how.
So bad matchup for Pickens.
Morris, give him the McVay, Morris, incredible coaching job by the Rams this year.
Yeah. Just a bad matchup for Pickens. Diontae Johnson's back. Kenny Pickett remains a big question mark. Can he distribute? Can he support 2 relevant fantasy wide receivers? Kind of just have to see this one play out. But I don't love the matchup in general.
I'm with Keegan on the Pittsburgh guys. The scheme is very clearly DJ heavy when they're both active. I think George Pickens had a nice run of being like the alpha in the offense, but I don't see DJ coming back and playing second fiddle to George Pickens, so I would probably have him ahead there. And then I'm pretty high on Jakobi Meyers this week. As you mentioned, the usage has been pretty awesome. I think the Bears probably try to key on Davante, maybe even double him up, which could lead to a pretty good game for Jakobi. So I like him a lot there. You could talk me into moving him up a couple rankings. Other than that, though, I think everyone else falls in line. The Chris Godwin season has just been kind of annoying, and this matchup really doesn't do him any favors if he's going to get right. It's not against Atlanta, who I think off the top of my head is 4th or 5th best in terms of limiting wide receivers. So it's he is pretty PPR safe, but at 29, we're locking Chris Godwin in for 10 points. That's probably not winning me matchups, but that's what he's been doing all year. So pretty frustrating there. Everyone else, feels about right in my opinion. We're starting to get into that tricky range where it's am I even starting these guys? I don't know, but they're still important, especially on Buymageddon here and a handful of injuries.
Last batch of guys that I have here: wide receiver 33, Romeo Doubs; wide receiver 34, my sweet prince, WanDale Robinson; wide receiver 35, Courtland Sutton; wide receiver 36, Michael Thomas; wide receiver 37, Gabe Davis; wide receiver 38, Jerry Jeudy; 39, Curtis Samuel; 40, KJ Osborne; 41, Rashee Rice; and 42, ending it for us is Jackson Smith and Jigba. Romeo Doubs put up a dud in Watson's first full healthy game back, but I think he'll continue to have good wide receiver 2 usage. It's a good bounce back spot against a bad Denver defense, but beware of a low scoring, slow paced slog. He's probably going to have to catch a touchdown. WanDale's probably my highest non-injury mover up the boards against,
I like this one.
against expert consensus rankings. He's been the clear number one target earner at wide receiver for the Giants. Hilarious. The number one wide receiver for the Giants is the wide receiver 34 for me. That just tells you the state of that offense. But he's seen 5+ targets in every game he's played in. Cake matchup against a down bad Commander secondary. Courtland Sutton is the clear wide receiver in this offense against a Green Bay secondary that's been good. You probably start him as your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. It's just not great, but he's been solid. Mike Thomas is Mike Thomas. Gabe Davis, TD dependent wide receiver in what most likely will probably be a low scoring matchup. You're going to probably play him because you're going to play TD roulette. Jerry Jeudy, I'm good. Curtis Samuel, clear wide receiver 2 in the Commanders offense against a wide receiver friendly Giants defense. KJ Osborne, interesting, has the same target share and yards, receiving yards share. I'm sorry, he had the same target share and yards per route run. No, what was it? Him and Addison basically had very similar roles, except Addison's ADOT was almost twice KJ Osborne's. So that's why Addison's going to be a much better play than Osborne. Rashee Rice is the best wide receiver option for this Chiefs in this bizarro wide receiver by committee thing they have. I can't move him up any higher if he's a part-time player, but the Chargers, that's a sweet matchup. Sweet matchup.
If there was ever a week.
It's a sweet
There was
matchup.
ever a week.
And then Jackson Smith-Njigba showed signs of life barely last week, but this is a plus matchup. He's locked into 3 wide receiver sets. If they stop running those dumb 5 fullback sets in the backfield, if we can run some 3 wide receiver sets here, we might actually see a big week out of JSN. So that's it. Those are the top 42 wide receivers. Before we jump, any comments on that last tier, guys?
Yeah, with JSN, they've had to be in so little 11 personnel because their offensive line has been so banged up, and they just have not had an opportunity to play certain types of personnel groupings. Now that their offensive line gets better, I think JSN is a perfect person to watch as change happens on the offensive line. WanDale Robinson, great call out. He's a sneaky good play, even if Tyrod plays too, because just quick, get the ball out. I mean, 8 targets, 8 receptions last week. And like you said, 5+ targets in his last several matchups, or everyone that he's played at least. And then I have just a hunch, it feels like a Gabe Davis week. It's going to be such a stinky AFC East week. And he's going to catch a 95-yard bomb.
Lord knows.
Bill Belichick.
Lord knows
Patriots.
we need it. Us Gabe Davis people.
While they lower Bill Belichick into the grave under Gillette Stadium. Nailing the coffin for his coaching career.
Edit him in a Chargers hoodie. That was an unreal edit that you sent over.
That was one of the most unreal edits.
You got to put that on.
It's pretty interesting to see Curtis Samuel entering into weekly top 40 wide receiver rankings. It's a massive bummer.
Legit,
you would like us to be talking about Jahan Dotson, but
it makes me sad, dude. I was so high on the Jahan Dotson hype train, and he's if you watch the tape, it's just zero effort. If he's not the first read on routes or against man, it's just the effort is super concerning with Jahan Dotson, which maybe makes sense why they're punishing him as the kick holder now. Brutal though, just brutal. But yeah, no, there's some fun guys in this range.
Down bad.
I think JSN is close to showing up. The ADOT is getting better week over week. The snaps are getting better week over week. It only feels like a matter of time. I feel like he's just gonna explode onto the scene. I don't think it's gonna be this gradual increase in production because that's really not happening right now. I think he's just gonna show up for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns one week and be I'm here. It's the Rose Bowl.
He should have had
again.
a touchdown last
here.
week. He had a really nice route where he got put in motion, running towards the line, and then just zipped up. Play broke down. It was perfect, and Geno didn't pull the trigger. Dude, it was
that fake block.
Geno
against
did
the
not look that
right?
good last week, but we're starting him this week against the Cardinals. Yeah. So if there's ever been a get right for this Seattle offense, this is the week. But that's it for wide receivers. Again, questions, lineup decisions, drop it in the comments. The 3 of us, we're going through it. We value your feedback. We actually value when you talk shit. So lay it on us. We appreciate it.
I like it.
Before we jump, Keegan, Aidan, anything for the listeners?
Nope. I got nothing today.
All aboard the Teabag Show.
Teabag, teabag, teabag.